My father did not hand me a slice of cake for my 30th birthday. Instead, he wiped a smudge of buttercream from his lip, looked me dead in the eye, and handed me a blue folder containing a federal DNA test and an invoice for $348,000. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice echoing off the walls of the restaurant. "You are not our daughter. You are a bad investment, and we want a refund." My mother stood next to him, gripping the keys to my penthouse that she had snatched from my purse, nodding in agreement. I stood there humiliated in front of 100 friends and family members, my world collapsing. But what they did not know was that the man sitting in the dark corner of the room, the one they thought was just a random guest, was about to stand up and change everything. Before I tell you how I reclaimed my name and left them with nothing but their greed, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who finally fought back. I am Gabrielle, 30 years old, and up until an hour ago, I thought I was the director of medical supply chains for the largest hospital network in Atlanta. To my family, however, I was just Gabby, the warehouse worker, who never quite measured up to their standards of elegance. I stood outside the heavy mahogany doors of the Onyx room, checking my reflection in the glass. I was 10 minutes late. Traffic on Peachtree Street had been a nightmare, and I had spent the last hour on a conference call approving a shipment of MRI machines. I smoothed down the lapels of my cream-colored suit. It was a tailored piece from Italy, costing more than my father's entire wardrobe, but I never told them that. To them, I worked in a dusty warehouse, so I let them believe my clothes were knockoffs from the discount rack. I took a deep breath, preparing a smile. This was supposed to be a surprise party. My sister Destiny had sent me a cryptic text earlier saying everyone was waiting. I pushed the doors open, expecting a chorus of surprise and the popping of champagne corks. Instead, I walked into a wall of silence so thick it felt like I was underwater. The private dining room was packed. I scanned the sea of faces. There were my parents, Reverend Marcus and Serena Vance, sitting at the head table like royalty holding court. There was Destiny, glowing in a sequined gold dress that I knew I had paid for, sitting next to her husband Hunter. And behind them were nearly 100 members of my father's congregation. The choir director, the deacons, the Sunday school teachers. People who had watched me grow up. People I had secretly helped pay for surgeries and tuitions. Not a single one of them smiled. No one held a drink. No one moved. The air conditioning was humming aggressively, but the room felt suffocatingly hot. I took a tentative step forward, my heels clicking loudly on the polished marble floor. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I am so sorry I am late. Work was crazy." Before I could finish, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the entrance, blocking my path. It was Hunter, my brother-in-law. He was a tall man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, the kind of man who wore three-piece suits to hide the fact that he had not held a steady job in 3 years. He held a glass of dark red wine in one hand, swirling it dangerously close to my cream jacket. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Hunter said, his voice loud enough for the back of the room to hear. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my suit with a sneer of disgust. "You look like you just came from a double shift moving boxes, Gabby. Did you forget to shower off the warehouse smell, or is that just your natural scent?" A few people in the back snickered. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Hunter," I said, keeping my voice low, "this is a Saint Laurent suit, and I came straight from the office." Hunter laughed, a sharp barking sound. "Right. The office. You mean the loading dock?" He stepped closer, invading my personal space. "You know we were taking bets on whether you would even be allowed in. The dress code here is exclusive. This isn't the cafeteria, Gabby. This is the Onyx room. But I guess when you are used to mediocrity, you do not notice when you are so clearly out of place." I tried to step around him, but he shifted his weight, blocking me again. I looked toward the head table, waiting for my father to intervene, waiting for my mother to tell Hunter to stop being cruel. But Reverend Marcus just sat there, cleaning his glasses with a silk handkerchief, looking at me with an expression of profound boredom. My mother was busy adjusting the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, the one I had bought her for Mother's Day 2 years ago. "Let me pass, Hunter," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I am here to celebrate with my family." Family. Hunter repeated the word like it was a joke he was explaining to a toddler. He turned to the room, spreading his arms wide. "She thinks she is here to celebrate. Isn't that rich?" He finally stepped aside, gesturing toward the far wall behind the head table. I followed his gaze, and that is when I saw it. There were no balloons. There were no streamers. Instead, hanging above my parents' heads was a massive vinyl banner read with bold white block letters. It looked like something you would see at a foreclosure auction. It did not say "Happy Birthday." It read, "Payment due date." My stomach dropped. I looked from the banner to my father. "Dad, what is this? Is this some kind of joke?" My father stood up slowly. He adjusted his collar the same way he did before delivering a sermon on damnation. He tapped the microphone in front of him. The feedback squeal made everyone wince, but he didn't apologize. He just stared at me, his eyes cold and hard behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Sit down, Gabrielle," he commanded, his voice booming through the speakers. "But Dad, the banner," I stammered. "I said sit down," he roared, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. I flinched instinctively, finding the nearest empty chair and sinking into it. It was a folding metal chair placed awkwardly in the center of the room, facing the head table, like a defendant's seat in a courtroom. Everyone else was in plush velvet seats. The symbolism was not lost on me. "Today is not a celebration, Gabrielle," my father continued, his voice dropping to that smooth, dangerous baritone he used when he wanted to make the congregation feel guilty for not tithing enough. "Today is a day of reckoning. For 30 years this family has carried a burden named Gabrielle." I looked around the room, pleading with my eyes for someone, anyone, to speak up. Deacon Jones looked down at his shoes. Mrs. Gable, my old piano teacher, turned her head away. They knew. Everyone knew whatever was coming except me. Hunter walked back to his seat next to Destiny, leaning over to whisper something in her ear. Destiny threw her head back and laughed, the sound sharp and jarring. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and I saw the red light of a recording indicator. She was live streaming this. "Dad, please," I whispered, my hands shaking in my lap. "Why are you doing this?" My father ignored me. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick blue folder. He held it up for the room to see, like Moses holding the commandments. "You all know the story," my father addressed the crowd, his voice taking on a theatrical quality. "You know how Serena and I, in our infinite charity, decided to expand our family 30 years ago. We prayed for a child, and God tested us." He looked at me with pure venom. "We did not give birth to this." He gestured at me vaguely. "We found her." The room went deadly silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had always known I was adopted. It was never a secret. But the story had always been that I was adopted through a private agency, that my biological parents were college students who couldn't care for me. My father opened the folder. 30 years ago, I was walking past the Greyhound bus station downtown, he lied. The words slipped out of his mouth so easily. I heard a crying sound coming from behind the dumpsters. And there, wrapped in a filthy, grease-stained towel, was this baby. He pointed a finger at me. She was black with dirt. She smelled of garbage and neglect. No one wanted her. The police said she was a lost cause. But Serena and I, we are good Christians. We could not leave a creature of God to rot in a dumpster. So we took her in. We cleaned her off. We gave her our name. We gave her a home. I sat frozen, my mouth open. That is a lie, I tried to say, but my voice failed me. I had seen my birth certificate. I had seen the adoption papers. They were sealed, but they existed. This bus station story was insane. "But you cannot wash away bad blood," my father shouted, getting into the rhythm of his preaching. "You can scrub the skin, but you cannot scrub the soul. For 30 years we have watched her. We have seen the greed. We have seen the selfishness. We have seen the way she looks at our true daughter Destiny with jealousy. Destiny made a sad face at the camera phone, wiping a fake tear. We tried to save her, my mother. Serena spoke up for the first time. Her voice was icy. We gave her piano lessons. We sent her to private school. We bought her clothes. We tried to make her one of us. But look at her. She gestured to me in my cream suit. She still looks like she belongs in that dumpster. She is ungrateful. She hides her money. She drives a Lexus while her father drives a 5-year-old sedan. She lives in a penthouse while we struggle to maintain the Lord's house. She is a parasite. The crowd began to murmur. I heard an amen from the back. My heart shattered. These were lies. I paid the mortgage on the church. I bought my father that sedan. I paid for Destiny's entire wedding. My father pulled a paper out of the folder. We decided it was time to close the account, he said. We ran a DNA test. We compared her genetic markers to ours just to be sure there wasn't even a drop of accidental relation. And praise God there is not. He threw the paper onto the table. You are not a Vance Gabrielle. The science proves it. You are a genetic stranger, a charity case that has expired, and we are tired of funding a stranger. He picked up another stack of papers thick and stapled together. This is a bill, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Since you are not family, everything we spent on you was a loan. Every diaper, every meal, every school book, every Christmas present. My accountant has tabulated it all with interest. He looked at me with a smirk that chilled my blood. You owe us $348,000, Gabrielle, and we want our money back. Today. Or we are taking everything you have. I stared at him, the man I had called Dad for 3 decades. I looked at the red banner. Payment due date. The humiliation burned my skin like fire. But beneath the shame, something else was starting to spark. A realization. They didn't know about my job. They didn't know about my savings. And most importantly, they didn't know that the man sitting quietly in the back corner, the one they had ignored, was about to destroy their entire narrative. Hunter walked over to me, holding a credit card machine he must have brought from his failing electronics store. Do you want to swipe debit or credit, Gabby? Hunter sneered, shoving the machine in my face. Or should we just take the keys to that Lexus now? I looked up at him. The tears in my eyes dried up instantly. I stood up, pushing the metal chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. I will not be swiping anything, I said, my voice steady for the first time. My father laughed. Then get out, and leave the coat. We paid for that too, I am sure. I reached into my pocket, but not for my wallet. I reached for my phone. I saw the stranger in the back stand up. He was tall, wearing a suit that cost more than this entire building. He started clapping. Slow, rhythmic. Claps. My father looked confused. Excuse me, sir, he said, putting on his polite mask. This is a private family matter. The stranger didn't stop clapping. He walked into the light. It is a family matter. The stranger said, his voice deep and commanding. That is exactly why I am here. Because you just presented an invoice for my daughter. The room gasped. My father dropped the blue folder. And that is when the real party started. The room was spinning, or maybe it was just the blood rushing in my ears. The blue folder containing the DNA results lay on the white tablecloth like a dead bird, but my parents were not finished. My father sat back looking satisfied with his revelation, but my mother Serena was just getting started. She stood up, smoothing the front of her designer dress, the fabric rustling in the silence of the room. She did not look at me with anger. She looked at me with the cold, detached calculation of an auditor looking at a failing business. Turn on the projector, Marcus, she said to my father, her voice clipping through the air. My father pressed a button on a remote control. A motorized screen descended from the ceiling behind them, covering the red banner that demanded payment. A moment later, a beam of light cut through the dim room and a massive Microsoft Excel spreadsheet appeared on the screen. It was not a hastily made document. It was complex, color-coded, and terrifyingly detailed. The file name at the top read, Project Gabrielle, Liquidation Analysis. I stared at the screen, my eyes struggling to adjust to the brightness. Rows and rows of numbers scrolled by as my mother operated a wireless mouse. She clicked a tab labeled 1994 to 1999. You see, Gabrielle? My mother began stepping away from the table to stand next to the screen like a weather reporter predicting a hurricane. Your father spoke about the emotional burden, but I am a practical woman. I deal in numbers. And the numbers say you are a deficit. She pointed to row 4. October 1994. Infant formula. Similac brand. You had a sensitive stomach apparently. We could not buy the generic brand. We had to buy the premium. $450 for the first 3 months. She looked at me waiting for a reaction. I was a baby, I whispered, my voice cracking. I had to eat. My mother ignored me. She scrolled down. Diapers, wipes, pediatrician visits. It adds up. But we are fair people. We adjusted for inflation. That $450 is now worth nearly $900 in today's money. She clicked the mouse again, moving to another tab. The crowd watched in mesmerized silence. I looked at Deacon Jones in the front row. He was taking notes on a napkin. Let us move to your destructive phase, she said. The screen shifted to the year 2005. I saw a line item highlighted in red. November 2005, dining room window replacement. I remembered that day. I was 12 years old. Destiny had been chasing me with a pair of scissors, trying to cut my hair because she said it was too frizzy. I had run into the dining room, tripped over the rug, and crashed into the side window. I still had the scar on my elbow. Destiny had never been punished. Principal amount $200, my mother read. However, that was money we had set aside for Destiny's ballet recital. Because we had to fix the window, Destiny had to wear a used tutu. The trauma caused her to underperform. Destiny let out a small, tragic sigh from her seat, resting her head on Hunter's shoulder. So my mother continued, her eyes gleaming. We applied a standard credit card interest rate of 10% compounded annually for 18 years. She hovered the mouse over the total column. That $200 window now costs you $1,113. A gasp went through the room. Not of horror, but of agreement. I heard someone whisper, "That is just basic math." I felt like I was drowning. They were monetizing my childhood. Every mistake, every accident, every meal was a line item in a ledger I never knew existed. They had not been raising a child. They had been keeping a tab. But the worst is yet to come, Serena said, her voice dropping an octave. She clicked on a tab simply labeled Damages. This list was shorter, but the numbers were astronomical. Item 42, she read. Social depreciation. She looked at me with a look of pure disgust, her lip curling slightly. You were not aesthetically pleasing, Gabrielle. Let us be honest. Destiny was a Gerber baby. You were scrawny. You had skin issues. You needed braces for 5 years. Do you know how hard it is to maintain a family image of perfection when one child looks like she belongs in a shelter? I dug my fingernails into my palms so hard I felt skin break. We had to buy you special clothes to hide your knees. We had to pay for dermatologists. We had to pay for photographers to retouch family portraits, to make you look like you belonged with us. She pointed to a figure at the bottom of the screen. $50,000, she announced. $50,000. I stood up, my chair clattering backward. You are charging me $50,000 for being a child. For growing up, I am charging you for emotional distress caused by public embarrassment. She corrected me, her voice sharp as a whip. Do you know how many times I had to explain you to my friends? Do you know the shame of having a daughter who could not even smile correctly for a Christmas card? 50,000 is a discount, Gabrielle. I should be charging you for pain and suffering. She scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet. The final cell was highlighted in bright yellow. The number was so large it seemed abstract. $348,750.25. My mother read the numbers slowly, savoring every syllable. That is the cost of your existence, Gabrielle. That is what you cost us. And since you are not our blood, since the DNA proves you are a stranger, this was not parenting. This was a loan. A very long, very expensive loan. And the bank is closed. She reached into her purse, the same purse I had bought her in Paris last year, and pulled out a stapled document. It was thick, legal-sized paper. She slapped it onto the table next to the DNA results. "We prepared a settlement agreement," she said. Hunter stood up and walked over to the table, picking up the document. He walked toward me, a predatory grin plastered on his face. "It is a generous offer," Gabby Hunter said, thrusting the papers at me. I looked at the document. The header read, "Asset Transfer and Liability Release." My mother's voice boomed from the front of the room. "We know about the trust fund, Gabrielle. We know your grandmother. God rest her confused soul, left something for you that matures today on your 30th birthday. We do not know how much it is, but we know it belongs to this family." The realization hit me like a physical blow. That was it. That was the timeline. They had waited exactly until my 30th birthday because Grandma Dorothy's trust fund unlocked today. They didn't care about the DNA. They didn't care about the past. They just wanted to intercept the money before I could access it. "Sign the paper," my mother commanded. "It transfers all rights to any inheritance, pension, or assets you currently hold to Destiny Vance. In exchange, we will forgive the debt of $348,000. And if I don't," I asked, looking from Hunter to my mother. My father spoke up then, leaning into the microphone. "Then we go to the police," he said softly. "The police? For what?" "For fraud," my father said. "Family affection fraud. It is a real thing, look it up. You accepted our care, our food, and our shelter under false pretenses. You acted like a daughter when you were a burden. If you do not pay us back, it is theft of services. We will have you in jail by tonight." Hunter clicked a pen and held it out to me. "Sign it, Gabby," he whispered. "Don't be stupid. You are already an orphan today. Do you want to be a homeless felon too?" I looked at the pen. I looked at the spreadsheet still glowing on the wall. I looked at the 100 faces of the people I thought were my community watching me with zero sympathy. They truly believed I owed them this. They believed my life had a price tag, and they were here to collect. My hand trembled as I reached for the pen, but I wasn't reaching to sign. I was stalling. Because out of the corner of my eye, I saw the stranger in the back stand up again. He wasn't clapping this time. He was checking his watch as if he was timing exactly how long it took for people to hang themselves with their own greed. I took the pen from Hunter. I looked at my mother. "You kept a spreadsheet," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "You kept receipts for 30 years. Business is business," my mother said, crossing her arms. "You are right," I said, dropping the pen onto the floor. It rolled under the table. "Business is business, and I think you are about to be audited." The sound of the pen hitting the marble floor echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. It rolled under the table, coming to a stop against my father's polished wingtip shoe. I did not bend down to retrieve it. I did not look down. I kept my chin high, staring directly into the furious eyes of the woman who had just presented me with an itemized bill for my childhood. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the unsaid tension of 30 years of compliance finally snapping. My mother, Serena, looked at the pen, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She had expected me to cry. She had expected me to beg. She had certainly expected me to sign. In her world, I was the eternal subordinate, the one who existed solely to serve the needs of the Vance family image. My refusal was not just an act of rebellion, it was a glitch in her carefully constructed matrix. "You ungrateful little wretch," my father hissed, his voice losing its polished preacher cadence and descending into a guttural growl. Pick it up and sign the paper, Gabrielle. Do not make us do this the hard way. I am not signing away my future to pay for a past you forced upon me," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "And I am certainly not signing over my grandmother's trust to fund Destiny's delusions." That was the trigger. Hunter stood up. He did not stand up like a concerned family member. He stood up like a bouncer at a dive bar who had decided it was time to throw out a patron. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing the sweat stains on his dress shirt, and cracked his knuckles. It was a performance of masculinity, a show of force designed to remind me of my place. He walked around the table, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floor. He was a large man, soft around the middle from years of living off his wife's family, but he used his height as a weapon. He loomed over me, blocking out the light from the chandeliers, casting me in his shadow. "You think you are tough?" Gabby Hunter asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think because you have a little corporate job and a leased car that you are better than this family?" "It is not a lease," I said instinctively, clutching my purse tighter to my side. Hunter laughed, a cruel, dry sound. He reached out his hand, moving faster than I anticipated. He didn't grab my arm. He grabbed the strap of my leather tote bag. "Give it to me," he commanded. "No," I yelled, pulling back. "This is my property," I said. "Give it to me," Hunter roared. He yanked the bag with violent force. The strap dug into my shoulder, burning my skin before slipping from my grasp. I stumbled back, catching myself on the edge of a chair. Hunter held my purse like a trophy, a sneer twisting his face. "Let us see what the princess has in here," he mocked. "Let us see what assets we can liquidate right now." He did not open the bag and look inside. He turned it upside down. He dumped the entire contents of my purse onto the pristine white floor of the onyx room. It was a violation so intimate, so public, that I felt naked. My life scattered across the cold tiles. My wallet, my phone, a handful of tampons, my prescription bottle for migraines, a half-eaten protein bar, a compact mirror that cracked as it hit the ground. The sound was a cacophony of humiliation. The coins from the bottom of the bag rolled away, spinning and clattering, chasing the silence into the corners of the room. 100 people watched. 100 members of the church. Not one of them looked away. Not one of them stood up. They watched with a morbid curiosity, as if this were a part of the entertainment, a morality play, where the sinner is stripped bare before the congregation. I looked at my mother. She was sipping her iced tea, looking at the mess on the floor with a look of mild annoyance, as if I had spilled a drink rather than having my privacy violated. Hunter kicked through the pile of my belongings with his expensive Italian loafer. He kicked aside my wallet. He kicked aside my migraine medicine. He was looking for one thing. "Ah, here we go," he said. He bent down and snatched the key fob to my Lexus off the floor. He held it up to the light, dangling it in front of my face like he was teasing a dog with a bone. "Asset number 1 recovered," he announced to the room. "Destiny, honey, go wait by the valet stand. I think your new car is waiting." Destiny clapped her hands in delight, actually clapping as if this were a game show and she had just won the showcase showdown. "That is theft, Hunter," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I could feel the tears hot and stinging in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "It is repossession," he corrected me. He looked down at the floor again. His eyes landed on a tube of lipstick. It was a high-end brand, a deep crimson shade called Power Red. It was the lipstick I wore to board meetings. It was the lipstick I wore when I needed to feel invincible. It was the only splash of color I allowed myself in a life of gray compliance. Hunter stepped on it. He ground his heel into the tube. I heard the plastic crunch. I saw the red paste smear across the white marble floor like a streak of fresh blood. He twisted his foot, destroying it completely, turning my symbol of confidence into a stain. He stepped closer to me, so close I could smell the stale wine on his breath and the overpowering musk of his cologne. He invaded my personal space, forcing me to step back until my legs hit the chair behind me. He leaned down, bringing his face inches from my ear. The room was silent, expecting him to yell, but he didn't yell. He whispered, and the whisper was infinitely worse. "Look at this mess, Gabby," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Look at your feminine trash all over the floor. This is who you are. You think a suit and a car change anything. You are trash. You were found in the trash, and you will always be trash." He paused, letting the words sink in, then delivered the final blow. "You do not belong in a place like this. You belong in the ghetto with the rest of the unwanted strays. Now give me the code to the apartment, or I will drag you out of here by your hair." I froze. The racism, the classism, the sheer hatred in his voice paralyzed me. He wasn't just my brother-in-law. He was every person who had ever looked at me and decided I was less than. He was the embodiment of the insecurity that had plagued me my entire life. He raised his hand, placing it on my shoulder. His grip was hard, painful. He was preparing to shove me, to physically force me toward the exit. I flinched, closing my eyes, bracing for the impact of hitting the floor. But the shove never came. Instead, a sound cut through the tension. Clap. I opened my eyes. Clap. Hunter froze, his hand still gripping my shoulder. He looked up, confused. Clap. The sound was slow, deliberate, heavy. It was not polite applause. It was the sound of thunder approaching. It was coming from the back corner of the room, from the single table that sat in the shadows, the one everyone had ignored because they were too focused on my destruction. A figure stood up. A tall man in a charcoal suit. Clap. He walked out of the darkness and into the light of the chandelier. Clap. Hunter's hand loosened on my shoulder. The air in the room shifted instantly. The predator had just realized he was in the cage with something much, much bigger. The slow, rhythmic clapping stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving a silence in the room that was heavier than the noise had been. Hunter, who still had his hand clamped painfully on my shoulder, turned his head toward the back of the room. His expression shifted from arrogance to confusion, and then slowly to a dawning realization of danger. The man standing in the shadows stepped forward. He did not walk. He commanded the space. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair cut in a military-style fade, and a charcoal suit that was tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. On his lapel, catching the light of the chandelier, was a small gold pin, the seal of the state of Georgia. Behind him stood another man. This one was younger, wider, and radiated the kind of quiet menace that does not need to shout. He was at least 6 feet 5 inches tall, a wall of muscle packed into a dark suit. He wore a coiled earpiece. This was not a guest. This was a weapon. Hunter, seeing the size of the bodyguard, instinctively tried to puff out his chest, but it was a pathetic display. It was like a house cat trying to intimidate a panther. "Who the hell are you?" Hunter barked, though his voice wavered slightly. "This is a private event. You need to leave before I call security." The older man ignored Hunter completely. He did not even blink. He simply lifted one finger and pointed it at Hunter's hand, the hand that was still gripping my shoulder. "Remove it," the older man said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that vibrated in my chest. It was the voice of a man who was used to giving orders that changed laws. Hunter scoffed, his ego too inflated to read the room. "Or, what old man? You going to make me?" The older man nodded slightly to the giant behind him. "Make him," he said softly. The bodyguard moved with a speed that defied his size. In one heartbeat, he was across the room. In the next, he had seized Hunter's wrist. There was no struggle. There was no fight. The bodyguard simply twisted. I heard a sickening pop, followed by Hunter's scream. The grip on my shoulder vanished instantly. Hunter was spun around, lifted off his feet by the back of his cheap suit jacket, and tossed. He flew through the air for a terrifying second before crashing into a table of appetizers. The table collapsed. Shrimp cocktails and crystal glasses shattered everywhere. Hunter groaned, writhing in a pile of broken glass and cocktail sauce, looking like a discarded rag doll. The room erupted in gasps. Destiny screamed, rushing toward her husband, but stopping short when the bodyguard turned his impassive gaze toward her. "My father." Reverend Marcus jumped up from his seat. His face was purple with rage. He adjusted his glasses and pointed a trembling finger at the silver-haired man. "How dare you?" Marcus roared. "This is a house of God's people. You cannot just walk in here and assault my son-in-law. I will have you arrested. I will sue you for every penny you have. Do you know who I am? I am Reverend Marcus Vance. The silver-haired man finally walked into the center of the room. He stopped right in front of the head table. He looked at Marcus with an expression of profound disappointment, the way a teacher looks at a student who has failed a test they cheated on. I know exactly who you are, Marcus, the man said, and I know you are about as much a man of God as I am a ballerina. Marcus froze. He squinted, leaning forward. The lights from the projector were still glowing, casting long shadows. As the man stepped fully into the beam of light, the gold pin on his lapel shined brightly. Recognition flooded my father's face. The color drained from his skin instantly, leaving him looking gray and sickly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like he had seen a ghost. My mother Serena gasped, clutching her pearls. "Oh, my lord," she whispered. "That is Senator Thorne, Julian Thorne." The whisper traveled through the room like wildfire. Julian Thorne, the state senator, the man who sat on the Appropriations Committee, the man whose signature was on the grants that kept my father's church operational, the man who practically owned the political landscape of Atlanta. My father's demeanor underwent a transformation so rapid it was sickening to watch. The rage vanished, replaced instantly by a groveling, desperate servility. He smoothed his jacket. He forced a smile that looked like a grimace. He practically bowed. "Senator Thorne," he exclaimed, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "My apologies, my deepest apologies. The lighting in here is terrible. I did not recognize you. Please forgive my outburst. We are under a lot of stress." He gestured vaguely toward the wreckage of the appetizer table where Hunter was still moaning. "My son-in-law, he can be a bit spirited. But surely there is no need for violence. We are honored to have you here. Truly honored. Are you here for the fundraiser? I didn't know we had confirmed your attendance, but we can make a seat for you right here at the head table." Marcus kicked out a chair next to him, dusting off the seat with his hand, acting as if his son-in-law wasn't bleeding on the floor 5 feet away. Senator Thorne did not move toward the chair. He did not smile. He looked at me. For the first time, our eyes locked. His eyes were dark, deep, and filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity. It was something fiercer. It was recognition. "Are you all right?" he asked me, his voice gentle. I nodded, too stunned to speak. I was rubbing my shoulder where Hunter had grabbed me. My father laughed nervously, stepping between me and the senator, trying to block his view of me. "Oh, don't worry about her," Senator Marcus said, waving his hand dismissively. "Please ignore the scene. This is just a domestic staffing issue." Senator Thorne's eyes snapped away from me and locked onto Marcus. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "A staffing issue," Thorne repeated slowly. Yes, yes," Marcus stammered, sweating profusely now. "Just a disgruntled girl we took in. You know how it is with the help these days. You try to be charitable, you try to give them a roof over their heads, and they get entitled. She was just causing a scene, trying to ruin a family celebration. We were just in the process of letting her go." My mother Serena chimed in, trying to aid the deception. She stood up, flashing her most charming society smile. "It is true, Senator. We apologize you had to see this. Gabrielle is, well, she has always been a bit unstable. We have tried to help her, but sometimes you just have to cut ties with the toxicity. We are sending her away for her own good. Please let us get you a drink. We have a wonderful vintage." I stood there, feeling like the floor was dissolving beneath me. The help, unstable, toxic. Even in the presence of one of the most powerful men in the state, they couldn't stop lying. They couldn't stop erasing me. I looked at the senator, waiting for him to believe them. Everyone always believed them. They were the respectable religious leaders, and I was just the quiet, awkward girl in the background. Senator Thorne looked at Marcus. Then he looked at Serena. Then he looked at the blue folder containing the DNA results that was still sitting on the table. He reached out and picked it up. "You say she is the help?" Thorne asked, flipping open the folder. "Technically, yes," Marcus said, eager to agree. "We raised her, but..." As you can see from the mess she made, she is not exactly family material. She is just someone we employed to fill a space. Thorn closed the folder. The sound was sharp. He took a step closer to Marcus. He was taller than my father, broader, and infinitely more powerful. You just handed her a bill for $300,000, Thorn said. I heard you from the back. You charged her for diapers. You charged her for food. You charged her for existing. Marcus swallowed hard. Well, Senator, that is just accounting. It is a way to teach responsibility. She needs to learn the value of $1. Thorn laughed. It was a cold, terrifying sound. Teach responsibility. You, a man who has been skimming off the church donation fund for 5 years. The room went deadly silent. Marcus turned pale. I don't know what you are talking about, Marcus whispered. I think you do, Thorn said. But we can discuss your embezzlement later. Right now I want to discuss your vocabulary. Thorn turned to the crowd. He looked at the 100 faces watching him. Then he turned back to Marcus and Serena. You called her the help. You called her a stranger. You called her a bad investment. Thorn reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm, firm, and safe. He pulled me gently from behind my father's shadow until I was standing right next to him, shoulder to shoulder. Look at her, Marcus Thorn commanded. Look at her face. Look at her eyes. I looked at my father. He was trembling. You said you found her at a bus station, Thorn said, his voice rising, filling the cavernous room. You lied. You stole her from a nursery in Mercy General Hospital 30 years ago. You stole her because your own baby died and you needed a dependent to keep your welfare checks coming. You stole her. Thorn squeezed my hand. And you made a mistake today, Marcus. You invited the whole town to witness your cruelty. But you didn't check the guest list. Because if you had, you would know that I didn't come here for your fundraiser. I came here for her. Thorn turned to me, his eyes shining with tears that he refused to let fall. You called her the help, Thorn whispered, the anger vibrating in his chest. But you are wrong. She isn't the help. She isn't a stranger. And she certainly isn't a Vance. He looked at the crowd, then back at my terrified parents, delivering the words that would burn their world to the ground. You just called my daughter the help, and nobody insults my blood and walks away with a house, a job, or a shred of dignity. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my mother dropping her glass. It shattered on the floor, joining the wreckage of their lives. The silence in the onyx room was absolute. The shattered glass of my mother's drink lay on the floor, a sparkling testament to the sudden shift in power. Senator Julian Thorn did not shout. He did not lose his composure. He simply walked over to the table where my mother Serena had been operating the laptop. She tried to block him, her hands fluttering nervously over the keyboard. But one look from the senator was enough to make her recoil. He did not need to touch her. His presence was a physical force that pushed her back into her chair. He turned the laptop around. He plugged in a small encrypted USB drive that he had pulled from his breast pocket. You wanted to talk about history, Marcus? Julian said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You wanted to talk about how you found a dirty child at a bus station. You wanted to paint a picture of charity. But the problem with lies is that they leave a trail. And the problem with you is that you forgot that hospitals have eyes. Julian pressed a key. The massive screen behind him, which had just displayed the itemized bill of my childhood, flickered. The spreadsheet vanished. In its place, a video player opened. The footage was grainy black and white and clearly old. The timestamp in the bottom right corner read June 14th, 1994, 3:15 in the morning. I stepped closer to the screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. Let me narrate this for you, Julian said, stepping to the side so the entire room could see. This is the maternity ward of Mercy General Hospital, the East Wing. On the screen, a long, empty hallway appeared. It was dark, illuminated only by the safety lights near the floor. A moment later, two figures entered the frame. They were pushing a large industrial cleaning cart. They were not wearing the suits and designer dresses they wore today. They were wearing matching gray jumpsuits, uniforms. The crowd began to murmur. I heard someone whisper, "Is that a janitor's uniform?" "Yes," Julian answered the whisper, though he was looking straight at Marcus. 30 years ago, Reverend Marcus and First Lady Serena were not clergy. They were the night shift custodial staff at Mercy General. They mopped the floors, they emptied the trash, and they had access to every room in the building. On the screen, the two figures stopped in front of a door. The sign on the door, barely legible in the grain, read Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Marcus, the man on the screen, looked up and down the hallway nervously. Serena, the woman on the screen, was holding something. It was a bundle of blankets, but the way she held it, it was limp. It was still. My breath caught in my throat. I knew with a sickening instinct what was in that blanket. Julian's voice dropped, becoming heavy with grief. Earlier that night, Serena gave birth in a supply closet, Julian explained. She didn't want to go to a doctor because they were hiding income from the IRS. The baby was born prematurely. It did not survive. The room gasped. Serena let out a low, animalistic wail from her seat, covering her face with her hands. They had a problem. Julian continued, his eyes never leaving the screen. They had already filed the paperwork for government assistance. They had applied for increased housing benefits based on a dependent child. A dead child gets a funeral. A living child gets a check. They needed a baby to keep the money flowing. On the video, the figure of Marcus opened the door to the NICU with a master key. They pushed the cleaning cart inside. The camera angle switched. This footage was clearer. It was inside the nursery. Rows of plastic bassinets lined the room. Most were empty, but one near the window was occupied. "That is my daughter," Julian said, his voice breaking for the first time. "That is Camille. She was born 3 days prior. My wife, my late wife, had complications. She was in the ICU recovering. I had gone home for 2 hours to shower and change." On the screen, Serena walked over to the bassinet. She looked down. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look conflicted. She reached into the bundle she was carrying, the lifeless body of her own child, and placed it into the bassinet. Then she reached in and picked up the living, breathing baby. She picked up me. She wrapped me in a dirty towel from the cleaning cart to hide me. She placed me into the canvas laundry bag hanging off the side of the cart. I put a hand over my mouth to stop a scream from escaping. I watched myself, a 3-day-old infant, being tossed into a bag of dirty linen like I was garbage. "They swapped them," Julian said. "They left their deceased child in place of mine." When the nurses did their rounds at 4 a.m., they found a cold baby. My wife and I were told our daughter had passed away in her sleep from SIDS. We buried a stranger. We mourned a child who wasn't ours. And while we were planning a funeral, these two— he pointed a shaking finger at Marcus and Serena. These two were walking out the back loading dock with a stolen baby hidden in a trash cart. The video ended with the two figures disappearing into the elevator. The screen went black. For a moment, no one breathed. The horror was too absolute. Then the sound of retching broke the silence. One of the choir members was sick into a potted plant. I stood there frozen. My entire life replayed in my mind in a split second. The coldness, the emotional distance, the way my mother never hugged me, the way my father looked at me with calculation rather than love, the spreadsheet, the bill, the constant demands for money. It all made sense. I wasn't the black sheep. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the golden goose. They didn't hate me. They simply didn't care about me as a human being. I was an asset. I was a tool they had stolen to unlock welfare checks, tax credits, and eventually a paycheck from my own hard work. The reason they treated me like an employee was because in their minds that is exactly what I was. I was an investment that was supposed to pay dividends. Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of clarity. The burning shame I had felt 10 minutes ago when they called me a dumpster baby was gone. I wasn't unwanted. I was so wanted that I was stolen. I was so valuable that my father, my real father, had spent 30 years looking for me. Julian walked over to me. He stood in front of me, blocking the view of the monsters at the table. He reached out and cupped my face with both hands. His hands were shaking. I hired private investigators for 20 years. He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I never believed she was gone. I felt it. And last week when I saw you at the charity gala, you have her eyes. You have your mother's eyes. He pulled a small plastic bag from his pocket. Inside was a strand of hair. I took this from your coat when I bumped into you, he confessed. I ran the test. You are Camille Thorne. You are my daughter. And I am so sorry I wasn't there to protect you from these animals. I leaned into his touch. It was the first time in 30 years I felt the touch of a parent who actually loved me. Behind us, Marcus stood up. The fear on his face had turned to a cornered feral desperation. That video is fake, he screamed, his voice cracking. It is AI. It is deepfake. You are trying to frame a man of God. The crowd turned to look at him, but this time, they didn't look with reverence. They looked with revulsion. They saw the janitor in the expensive suit. They saw the kidnapper behind the pulpit. Julian turned slowly to face him. The FBI forensics team who restored that footage disagrees, Marcus Julian said calmly. And the agents waiting outside right now tend to trust their own evidence over the word of a man who just charged his kidnapped daughter for breast milk. The reality of the situation finally hit Serena. She didn't scream at me this time. She didn't demand money. She looked at the door, realizing there was no way out. Her reign of terror, built on a lie 3 decades old, had just crumbled in under 3 minutes. I stepped out from behind Julian. I wiped the tears from my face. I looked at the woman who had raised me, the woman who had put me in a laundry bag. You charged me a fee for social depreciation, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. You said I cost you $50,000 because I was ugly. Serena flinched. I think you got the math wrong, I said. You didn't lose money on me. You stole a life. And the price of a life is a lot higher than $300,000. The price is everything you have. The video screen went black, but the image of my infant self being tossed into a laundry bag seemed to be burned into the retinas of everyone in the room. I stood next to Senator Julian Thorne, the man who was my biological father, and watched the people I had called family for 30 years. A normal person caught in a lie of this magnitude would crumble. A normal person would weep, beg for forgiveness, or perhaps faint from the sheer weight of their own immorality. But Serena Vance was not a normal person. She was a master of survival, a woman who had built an entire life on the foundation of theft and deception. She did not cry. She did not look down. Instead, a terrifying transformation took place. The shock on her face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She stood up, knocking her chair over. The sound was sharp and violent. She looked at Julian, then at me, and her eyes were blazing with a fire that seemed to consume all reason. So what? Serena screamed. The 2 words hung in the air, more shocking than the silence that had preceded them. So what? She repeated, her voice rising to a shriek that made the crystal glasses vibrate. So what if we took her? She stepped out from behind the table, walking toward us with aggressive strides. She pointed a finger at me, a finger adorned with a diamond ring that I had paid for. Look at her, Serena yelled, gesturing wildly at me. She is standing there in a designer suit, healthy, educated, alive. Do you think she would be alive if we left her in that hospital? Do you think she would be standing here today if I hadn't taken her in? She turned to the crowd, her arms wide, appealing to the very people she had duped for decades. I saved her, Serena bellowed. I am the one who woke up in the middle of the night when she had a fever. I am the one who made sure she did her homework. I am the one who cooked her meals. This man, this stranger in a suit, where was he? He was gone. I did the work. Julian stepped forward, shielding me slightly, but Serena was undeterred. She was running on adrenaline and narcissism now. You dare to come into my house and judge me, she spat at Julian. You dare to show a video from 30 years ago and act like it erases everything I did. Biology is nothing. Blood is nothing. I am her mother. Because I paid the price, I paid with my time, I paid with my youth. She turned her venom back on me. And you, Gabrielle, you ungrateful, selfish child, you stand there and let him call us criminals. After I fed you, after I clothed you, you owe me. You owe me every breath you take. She slammed her hand against her chest. I raised you. Me, not him. The labor of raising a child is worth more than the labor of birthing one. You still owe me that money. That invoice stands. You ate my food, you lived in my house, you think finding out you were stolen changes the bill? It doubles it because I raised a child that wasn't even mine. I did charity work for 30 years and I expect to be reimbursed. Her logic was so twisted, so profoundly sick, that I felt a wave of nausea. She was gaslighting the entire room. She was trying to convince us that kidnapping was actually an act of benevolence, and that the victim of the crime owed the criminal a service fee. Destiny stood up, then wiping her fake tears and joining her mother's offensive line. Mom is right, Destiny shouted, her voice shrill and piercing. How could you do this to us, Gabby? We are a family. Destiny walked over to Serena, wrapping an arm around her, creating a tableau of the victimized mother and loyal daughter. You are ruining everything, Destiny screamed at me. Look at Mom. She is shaking. You brought this stranger here to humiliate us on Dad's big night. You are so selfish. It is always about you, isn't it? You couldn't just pay the bill and be grateful. You had to go and dig up the past. Destiny looked at the crowd, her eyes wide and imploring. She has always been like this. Destiny cried. She has always been jealous of us. She hates that we are a real family, so she made up this story to tear us apart. She is a monster. I stared at my sister. The sister whose tuition I paid. The sister whose wedding I funded. She knew the truth now. She saw the video. She knew I was stolen. And yet her only concern was that the flow of money might stop and her social standing might be damaged. Julian finally spoke, his voice cutting through their hysteria like a sword. You are not a savior, Serena Julian said coldly. You are a parasite. You didn't raise a daughter. You groomed a victim. And you, young lady, he looked at Destiny, you are an accomplice to extortion. This is not extortion, Serena shrieked. It is compensation. Suddenly, Hunter jumped onto the stage. He saw that the tide was turning. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the choir members. He saw the confusion on the faces of the deacons. He knew that if they lost the crowd, they lost everything. They needed a villain, and a rich white politician coming into a black church community was the perfect target. Hunter grabbed the microphone from the table. Listen to me, Hunter yelled, his voice booming through the speakers, distorted and loud. Do not listen to this man. He pointed accusingly at Julian. Look at him. Look at his suit. Look at his shoes. He is part of the establishment. He is part of the system that wants to destroy our community. Hunter ran to the edge of the platform, sweating profusely, his eyes wild. This is a trick. That video is a fake. It is AI, artificial intelligence. You have seen the news. They can make videos of anything now. They are trying to frame Reverend Marcus. A murmur went through the crowd. The mention of AI and conspiracy theories struck a chord with some of the older members who were suspicious of technology. They want to take down a strong leader. Hunter continued, waving his arms. They want to destroy this church. They want to destroy a black family that has risen from nothing. Are you going to let this outsider come in here and arrest our pastor based on a cartoon he made on a computer? Hunter jumped down from the stage and grabbed the arm of Deacon Jones. Deacon. You know, Marcus, You have prayed with him. Are you going to believe this stranger? Or are you going to believe the man who baptized your grandchildren? He ran to another table. Mrs. Gable Marcus visited you when you were sick. Is this the face of a kidnapper? No. This is the face of a man being persecuted. Hunter ran back to the center of the room, standing between Julian and the crowd, acting as a human shield. This is an attack on our faith, Hunter roared. This is a test from the devil. He sends a rich man with a fake video to test our loyalty. We must protect the pastor. We must protect our family. The atmosphere in the room shifted dangerously. The shock was replaced by confusion, and in some faces, anger. Hunter was pushing buttons that had nothing to do with facts and everything to do with fear and tribalism. Several men from the back of the room stood up. They were large men ushers who doubled as security for the church. They looked at Julian and his bodyguard with hostility. "Get out!" one of them shouted. "Leave the pastor alone," another woman yelled. Hunter smirked. He had turned the mob. He looked at me with triumphant malice. He had successfully weaponized their faith to protect his greed. Serena saw the shift and seized the moment. She threw her hands up to heaven. "Oh Lord," she wailed theatrically, "defend your servants from these lies. Strike down the wicked who seek to destroy your house." The room began to get loud. People were standing up, moving toward us. It was no longer a party, it was a riot in the making. Julian did not flinch, he did not step back. He looked at the angry faces advancing on us, then he looked at me. He wasn't afraid. He was preparing to drop the hammer. "They want to talk about faith," Julian whispered to me. "Let us give them science." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He handed it to me. "Finish it, Camille," he said. I took the envelope. I looked at Hunter, who was cheering on the crowd like a conductor of chaos. I looked at Serena, who was praying loudly to a god she mocked with her every action. They thought they could shout down the truth. They were wrong. I walked toward the projector, pushing past Hunter. He tried to block me, but Julian's bodyguard stepped in his presence alone enough to make Hunter retreat. I stood before the laptop. I didn't need a microphone. I had the truth, and the truth was about to silence them all. Hunter was still standing on the edge of the platform, his chest heaving, waiting for the crowd to surge forward and throw us out. He thought he had won. He thought that by invoking God and conspiracy theories, he could drown out reality. But Senator Julian Thorne did not shout back. He did not engage in a screaming match. He simply reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a single thick envelope. It was not a flimsy blue folder like the one my father had used. It was heavy cream-colored and stamped with the official seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Julian walked past Hunter as if he were invisible. He walked past my mother Serena, who was still panting from her theatrical performance of victimhood. He placed the envelope under the high-resolution camera of the document projector. "You want to talk about fake videos?" Julian said, his voice calm, steady, and terrifyingly quiet. "You want to talk about AI. You want to talk about plots against the church. That is fine. We can talk about all of that. But first, let us talk about biology." He opened the envelope. He pulled out a document that had a holographic watermark shimmering in the light. "This is not a drugstore DNA test," Julian announced to the room. "This is a court-ordered, federally verified chain of custody DNA test. I had it expedited through the state crime lab this morning." He pointed to two graphs on the screen. One was labeled Subject A, Julian Thorne. The other was labeled Subject B, Camille Thorne, also known as Gabrielle Vance. The room fell silent again. The anger that Hunter had whipped up began to dissipate, replaced by a tense curiosity. Science has a way of cutting through emotion, and the graph on the screen was undeniable. Julian ran his finger across the lines. They matched perfectly. "Probability of paternity," Julian read aloud. 99.9999%. He looked up at Marcus. "There is no margin for error, Marcus. There is no AI glitch. She is my daughter, my blood, my DNA. Marcus tried to speak to stammer out another lie, but Julian cut him off. But that is only half the story, Julian said. Proving she is mine is easy. Proving she isn't yours. Well, I thought you might try to claim some miracle. I thought you might claim you adopted her legally. So I dug deeper. Julian pulled another document from the envelope. This one looked older. The paper was yellowed at the edges. It was a medical file. This is a subpoenaed medical record from Mercy General Hospital dated November 1991, Julian said. He looked at Serena. My mother went rigid. Her eyes widened in genuine terror. She knew what this paper was. She had forgotten it existed, buried under 30 years of lies, but now it was staring her in the face. 3 years before Gabrielle was born, Julian explained, speaking to the congregation, Serena Vance was admitted to the hospital for emergency surgery following the birth of her first daughter, Destiny. There were complications. Severe hemorrhaging. Julian turned the page on the projector. The words on the screen were stark, medical, and final. Total abdominal hysterectomy, Julian read. A gasp went through the room. It started in the front row and rippled to the back. The women in the room, the mothers, they understood immediately what those 3 words meant. For those of you who do not have a medical degree, Julian said, his voice hard as steel, it means Serena Vance had her uterus removed in 1991. He pointed at me. Gabrielle was born in 1994. He let the silence hang there for a moment, letting the math sink in. It is medically, physically, and scientifically impossible for Serena Vance to have given birth to Gabrielle, Julian said. She didn't have a womb. He turned to look at Serena. She was shrinking in her chair, looking smaller and smaller. The defiance was gone. The gaslighting had run out of fuel. So Julian continued, relentless. When you stood here 5 minutes ago and screamed that you paid the price of labor, when you screamed that you birthed her, you were lying. You stole a baby because you physically could not have another one to replace the one that died. You stole her to fill a void, and then you billed her for the privilege of being your emotional bandage. The crowd turned. The energy in the room shifted violently. The ushers who had been ready to throw us out now looked at Marcus and Serena with disgust. Mrs. Gable, the piano teacher, stood up and walked out. Then Deacon Jones followed. The illusion of the Holy Family had shattered. There was no conspiracy. There was no attack on the church. There was just a barren woman and a greedy man who had stolen a child and spent 30 years punishing her for their own crimes. Hunter dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud thud. He backed away from the edge of the stage, realizing his human shield of believers had evaporated. I stood there watching the faces of the people who had raised me. I waited for the pain to hit me. I waited for the grief of knowing my entire life was a fabrication. But it didn't come. Instead, a cold, clean clarity washed over me. It was like a fever breaking. For 30 years, I had walked on eggshells. I had apologized for taking up space. I had worked double shifts to buy their affection. I had let them criticize my hair, my clothes, my career, and my very existence. I had let them convince me that I was lucky they tolerated me. I looked at the DNA test on the screen. I looked at the medical records. I wasn't the lucky one. They were. They were lucky I hadn't found this out sooner. They were lucky I had been docile. They were lucky I had been desperate for love, but I wasn't desperate anymore. I reached up and wiped the tears from my cheeks. I felt my spine straighten. I felt the muscles in my shoulders relax. The terrified little girl who just wanted her mommy to love her, she died in that room, and the woman who replaced her was done playing games. I stepped forward. I walked past Julian. I walked past the bodyguard. I walked right up to the head table where Marcus and Serena sat trembling in the wreckage of their lies. I picked up the microphone that Hunter had dropped. The feedback whined for a second, then cleared. The room went deadly quiet. Everyone was looking at me, not at the banner, not at the screen, at me. You spent 3 hours humiliating me, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was deep calm and resonated with a power I didn't know I had. You put my face on a screen. You put a price tag on my childhood. You invited 100 people to watch me bleed. I looked at Serena directly. She couldn't meet my eyes. You wanted a return on your investment, Mother, I asked. You wanted to close the account. I turned to the projector. I unplugged Julian's laptop. I reached into my purse, the purse Hunter had dumped on the floor, and pulled out my own phone. I plugged it in. The screen flickered. A new spreadsheet appeared. But this wasn't a list of diapers and baby food. This was a list of bank transfers, wire confirmations, mortgage payments. You showed them your math, I said. Now let me show them mine. I looked at the crowd. Reverend Marcus told you I work in a warehouse. He told you I was a failure. I clicked a button on my phone. My LinkedIn profile appeared on the enormous screen. It showed my title, Director of Global Supply Chain Logistics. It showed my awards. It showed my salary bracket. I manage a budget of $400 million a year, I said. I do not move boxes. I move economies. I turned back to Marcus. And for the last 10 years, I have been moving this family. I clicked the next tab. Enough talking, I said into the microphone. It is time for the audit. And I promise you, Dad, you are not going to like the numbers. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the projector fan cooling down. My mother Serena sat slumped in her chair, the fight drained out of her by the undeniable truth of her medical records. My father Marcus was staring at the table, his hands gripping the tablecloth as if he were trying to keep the earth from spinning off its axis. They were waiting for me to scream. They were waiting for me to cry about my stolen childhood. But I was done crying. I was a professional, and in my world, when a deal goes bad, you do not get emotional. You audit the books. I held the microphone in one hand and my phone in the other. I looked at the crowd of 100 people who had spent the last hour judging my cheap suit and my warehouse job. You all laughed when Hunter asked if I smelled like the loading dock, I said, my voice echoing clearly through the room. You laughed because it was easier to believe I was a failure than to ask why a woman with a master's degree from Georgia Tech was working manual labor. I tapped my phone screen. The projector behind me flared to life again, but this time it did not show a DNA test. It showed my professional biography from the website of Atlanta Medical Systems. For 10 years I let you believe I moved boxes. I said, walking slowly toward my father. I let you believe I was a shift supervisor. I let you believe I lived paycheck to paycheck, because it was the only way to keep you from asking for more money than you already took. I pointed to the screen. I do not work in the warehouse, Dad. I am the Director of Global Supply Chain Logistics. A ripple of confusion went through the room. Hunter looked up from the floor, his eyes narrowing. What does that mean? Hunter spat, trying to regain some ground. It means you drive a forklift. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. It means I control an operational budget of $400 million a year, I corrected him. It means I decide which hospitals get MRI machines. It means I negotiate contracts with pharmaceutical companies in Switzerland. And most importantly for you, Reverend Marcus, it means I sit on the board of the Community Outreach Grant Program. My father's head snapped up. His face went pale. The grant program, he whispered. Yes, I said. The program that funded the new roof for your church last year. The program that bought the new van for the senior center. The program that pays your salary, Dad. I swiped the screen. A document appeared. It was a grant approval letter for $50,000 dated 6 months ago. At the bottom was a signature. Look at the signature, Dad, I commanded. He squinted. He had framed this letter in his office. He had told the congregation that God provided this money through a mysterious benefactor. He read the signature on the screen. G. Vance. You thought G. Vance stood for some executive named George or Gregory, I said. You never stopped to think that the daughter you called a failure was the one signing your paychecks. I watched the realization hit him. He had been biting the hand that fed him, not just metaphorically but literally. Every time he mocked my job, he was mocking the source of his survival. But that is corporate money, I continued, my voice hardening. That is business. Let us talk about the personal accounts. I switched tabs on the screen. A spreadsheet opened. It was titled, The Anonymous Donor. For the last decade, whenever this family hit a financial wall, a miracle happened, I said. Remember? 2018? Hunter gambled away the mortgage money. You were 3 days away from foreclosure. Then suddenly an anonymous check arrived at the church office for $40,000. I looked at Serena. You told the congregation it was a blessing from an angel. You cried in the pulpit. You wrote a thank you letter to Dear Anonymous Friend. I clicked a cell on the spreadsheet. A scanned image of a cashier's check appeared. It was drawn from my personal savings account. I am the angel mother, I said. I paid the mortgage. I scrolled down. 2019. Destiny needed a new car because she crashed her BMW while driving under the influence. The insurance wouldn't cover it. Who paid the $25,000 settlement to keep her out of jail? Destiny looked down at her lap, her face burning. Anonymous donor. I answered for her. Me. I kept scrolling, reading the items faster, letting the weight of the numbers crush them. 2020. Dad's heart surgery copay. $15,000. Me, 2021. The renovation of the parsonage kitchen because Serena wanted granite countertops. $30,000. Me, 2022. Hunter's failed crypto investment bailout. $20,000. Me. I turned to the crowd. They called me cheap. They called me selfish because I drove a used car and wore old clothes. They didn't know I was living below my means so I could save them from their own stupidity. I was the safety net they spat on. I highlighted the total at the bottom of the column. The number was bold and black. $580,000, I read aloud. That is the cash value of the transfers I have made to this family in 10 years. That does not include the gifts. That does not include the dinners. That is cold, hard cash that I poured into a black hole called the Vance family. I walked back to the table where the blue folder and my mother's ridiculous invoice still lay. I picked up the paper my mother had printed out, the one where she charged me for diapers and broken windows, the one totaling $348,000. You wanted to be transactional, Serena, I said, holding the paper up. You wanted to calculate the cost of a relationship. You charged me for being a child. You charged me for milk. Serena was shaking her head, tears finally streaming down her face, but they were tears of fear, not remorse. Gabrielle, please, she whispered. We didn't know. You didn't know I had money, so you treated me like trash, I countered. If you knew I was rich, you would have loved me. And that is why I never told you. Because I wanted to know if you could love me, for me, and you failed that test every single day for 30 years. I took the invoice in both hands. The sound of the paper tearing was the only sound in the room. I ripped it in half, then in quarters. I let the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. Your bill is rejected, I said, but mine is not. I turned back to the screen. I typed a quick formula into the spreadsheet. You charged me 10% interest, Mom, I asked. That seems fair. Let us apply the same rate to my contributions. Since my money was a loan and not a gift because strangers don't give gifts to kidnappers, you owe me interest. The number on the screen jumped. $580,000 compounded annually at 10% over 10 years. I looked at the final figure. $1.2 million, I announced. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Serena. I looked at Hunter and Destiny. That is what you owe me. $1.2 million. And unlike you, I do not accept payment plans. Marcus stood up, his legs shaking so bad he had to lean on the chair. Gabrielle, honey, we don't have that kind of money, he pleaded. You know we don't. We spent it. It is gone. I know you don't have it. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more threat than a scream. But you do have assets. I pointed to the door. You have a house. The one I paid for. You have cars. The ones I bailed out. You have a church building that sits on land that is increasing in value. I pulled a document from my purse. It wasn't a check. It was a lien. I prepared this just in case. I said, "This is a lien against all properties associated with the Vance Family Trust. I am freezing everything. The house, the cars, the church accounts." Hunter jumped up. "You can't do that. That is our money." "It is my money," I shouted finally, letting the anger explode. "It was always my money. You were just spending it." I looked at Julian Thorne, my real father, who was watching me with a look of intense pride. He nodded once. I turned back to the people who had stolen me. "You have 24 hours to vacate the parsonage," I said. "You have 24 hours to return the keys to the cars. And you have 24 hours to come up with a payment schedule for the remaining balance. If you don't, I will let the IRS know about the income you hid from them for 30 years. I dropped the microphone on the table. It rolled and hit the empty glass where my mother's wine used to be. "The meeting is adjourned," I said. "Get out of my sight." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. My parents were still reeling from the revelation that I was their anonymous donor, the financial life support they had been abusing for a decade. But I was not finished. I turned my gaze toward the man who had dumped my purse on the floor, the man who had crushed my lipstick under his heel and called me trash. Hunter. He was standing near the exit, trying to make himself small. His arrogance had evaporated the moment I revealed my true job title. He was tugging at his collar, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for a way out. He knew what was coming. He knew that if I had the receipts for my parents, I definitely had the receipts for him. I walked toward him. The click of my heels on the marble floor sounded like a countdown. "You called me a peasant, Hunter," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a shout. "You told this room that I belong in the ghetto. You stood there in your three-piece custom suit and judged me." I stopped 10 feet away from him. "You like to play the role of the Wall Street tycoon, don't you? You tell everyone you are a senior broker. You tell everyone you manage high-net-worth portfolios." I turned back to the screen behind me. "Let us check the portfolio." I tapped my phone. The screen changed. It was no longer a spreadsheet. It was a background check from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. It was a public record accessible to anyone who knew where to look. But clearly no one in this room, especially not my sister Destiny, had ever looked. The document on the screen had a large red stamp across the top. "Revoked." I read the text aloud for the people in the back. "Hunter Fitzgerald, license number 4920, status, terminated for cause. Date, 3 years ago." I looked at Hunter. He was pale, his skin taking on a sickly greenish hue. "You haven't traded a stock in 3 years, Hunter," I said. "You were fired for churning client accounts to generate commissions. You are not a broker. You are unemployed." A gasp went through the room. Destiny stood up, her hands trembling. "That is not true," she stammered, looking at her husband. "He goes to work every day. He has an office downtown." I looked at my sister with a mixture of pity and disgust. "He goes to a coffee shop, Destiny. He sits there for 8 hours playing online poker on his phone, and then he comes home and tells you he had a hard day at the market." I swiped the screen again. A bank statement appeared. This one was joint account held by Destiny and Hunter. "But a man has to eat, right?" I continued. "And a man like Hunter, who likes Italian loafers and vintage wine, needs a lot of money to maintain his image. So where does the money come from?" I highlighted a series of transactions. Withdrawal, $5,000. Withdrawal, $3,000. Transfer to DraftKings. Transfer to offshore betting. I looked at Marcus. "Dad, you mentioned your retirement fund was looking a little light lately. You thought it was the market downturn?" I pointed to the screen. "It wasn't the market. It was your son-in-law. He has access to your accounts because you trusted him to manage your investments. He didn't invest a dime. He liquidated it. Marcus clutched his chest. The betrayal was physical. He had welcomed this white man into our family, treated him like the son he never had, elevated him above me, and all the while, Hunter was bleeding him dry. "Hunter, is this true?" Marcus wheezed. Hunter didn't answer. He couldn't. The numbers were right there, glowing in high definition. "He has a gambling problem," I announced. "A massive one. He is currently $200,000 in debt to a bookie in Las Vegas." "200,000, Destiny shrieked. "Yes," I said. "And do you know how he has been paying the interest on that debt?" I clicked the next tab. A credit card statement appeared. It was Destiny's card, the one she thought was for emergencies. "He maxed out your cards, Destiny. He took out 3 credit lines in your name. You think you have excellent credit. You are bankrupt. You just don't know it yet because he intercepts the mail." Destiny collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. But I wasn't done. The financial ruin was bad, but the emotional betrayal was the final nail in the coffin. "You know, Hunter," I said, walking closer to him, "I could forgive the stealing. I could almost forgive the lying about your job. But what I cannot forgive is the hypocrisy. You stood here and lectured me about family values. You judged me for being single." I swiped to the final document. It was a hotel invoice. The Ritz-Carlton, downtown Atlanta. The date was highlighted in yellow. Last month. The 14th. I looked at Destiny. "Destiny. What was the 14th of last month?" I asked softly. She looked up, her mascara running down her face. "It was our anniversary," she whispered. He said he had to go to New York for a client meeting. He sent me flowers." I nodded. "He didn't go to New York, Destiny. He went 4 blocks away. To the Ritz." I pointed to the invoice on the screen. Room service for 2, champagne, oysters, and a spa package for a guest. I zoomed in on the guest name listed on the spa receipt. It wasn't Destiny Vance. "Who is Tiffany?" I asked Hunter. The room erupted. The shock was electric. The church members who frowned upon divorce but despised adultery even more turned on Hunter with a vengeance. "You took a woman named Tiffany to the Ritz on your 5th wedding anniversary," I said, my voice cold as ice. "And you paid for it with Destiny's credit card. You cheated on my sister on her anniversary using her own money." Hunter looked at the screen, then at Destiny, then at the angry crowd. He realized the game was over. There was no spinning this. There was no charm offensive that could fix this. He was exposed as a fraud, a thief, and a cheater. Destiny stood up. The sadness in her eyes was replaced by a blinding fury. She walked over to him. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She swung her hand and slapped him across the face with a force that echoed through the room. "You bastard!" she screamed. "You spent my money on her." Hunter stumbled back, holding his cheek. He looked at me with pure hatred. "You ruined everything," he shouted at me. "You jealous little witch. You ruined my life." "I didn't ruin your life, Hunter," I said calmly. "I just turned on the lights." He looked around. The bodyguard of Senator Thorne took a step forward. The deacons were rolling up their sleeves. Hunter realized he was outnumbered. Panic set in. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He turned and ran. He scrambled toward the emergency exit, knocking over a chair in his haste. He pushed past Mrs. Gable, nearly knocking the elderly woman down, and burst through the doors into the parking lot. "Coward!" someone shouted from the back. I watched the door swing shut behind him. He was running, but he wouldn't get far. Not with the police on their way. I turned back to my sister. She was standing alone in the middle of the room, crying, humiliated and broken. The golden child. The perfect daughter. Her life was a lie, just like mine had been. But while I had built a fortress of independence, she had built a castle on sand, and the tide had just come in. I didn't feel happy for her pain, but I felt a grim satisfaction that the scales of justice had finally balanced. I looked at her, then at my parents. "He is gone," I said, "and he took your retirement with him." I looked at the screen one last time, then unplugged my phone. The image of the hotel bill faded to black, leaving them in the dim light of their own destruction. Now, I said, turning to Destiny, let us talk about you. Hunter had fled the building like a thief in the night, leaving his wife standing alone in the center of the wreckage he had helped create. Destiny stood trembling in her sequined gold dress, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. She looked at the door where her husband had disappeared, then she looked at the crowd of church members who were now regarding her with open hostility. She looked at our parents Marcus and Serena, who were slumped in their chairs aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Finally, she looked at me. Her eyes were not filled with remorse. They were filled with panic. She was the golden child, the one who had never been told no, the one who had never faced a consequence in her life. She was drowning, and like a drowning person, she was ready to climb on top of anyone to keep her head above water. She placed both hands protectively over her rounded stomach. She let out a sob that sounded practiced, the kind of cry she used to get out of parking tickets. "You are happy now, aren't you?" Destiny wailed, her voice shrill and accusatory. "You drove my husband away. You humiliated our parents. You destroyed this family because you are bitter and jealous." She turned to Marcus and Serena, stumbling toward them. "Mom, Dad, please. You cannot listen to her. The stress. The stress is hurting the baby." She grabbed her stomach tighter, wincing as if in pain. "My blood pressure is spiking," she gasped. "I can feel it. If anything happens to your grandson because of Gabrielle's vendetta, I will never forgive her." Marcus looked up. The mention of the baby sparked a flicker of life in his dead eyes. This grandchild was his last hope. It was the legacy of the Vance name. It was the only pure thing left in a night of filth. "Gabrielle." "Stop," Marcus croaked, raising a shaking hand. "Leave your sister alone. She is carrying a child. Have some mercy." I watched them. I watched the way they instinctively rallied around her, even after everything. They were ready to forgive the credit card theft. They were ready to overlook the husband's betrayal. All because she was carrying the heir to the kingdom I had paid for. I walked slowly toward the table. I didn't look angry. I looked tired. I was tired of the lies. I was tired of the manipulation. But mostly I was tired of seeing my parents be played for fools by the very person they worshipped. "There is no stress hurting the baby, Destiny," I said softly. Destiny's head snapped up. "How dare you?" she screamed. "You are not a doctor. You don't know what I am feeling. I am not a doctor." I agreed. "But I am the administrator who oversees the obstetrics records for the entire state hospital network." I picked up my phone again. The projector was still humming the blank screen, waiting for the final slide. "You told Mom and Dad you are 4 months pregnant," I said. "You showed them an ultrasound picture." "Yes," Destiny yelled. "And we are going to name him Marcus after Dad." I nodded. It was a nice touch. Naming the baby after the man whose bank account you were draining. I tapped my phone. A document appeared on the screen. It was a surgical record from Mercy General Hospital. The date was clearly visible. 2 years ago. "Can you read the procedure listed here?" I asked the room. Destiny froze. Her hands dropped from her stomach. Her face went from red to a terrifying shade of white. "Stop it," she whispered. "Gabrielle, don't. Please." I didn't stop. I read it aloud. "Patient Destiny Vance. Procedure bilateral tubal ligation." The medical term hung in the air. For a second, Marcus and Serena looked confused. They didn't understand the jargon, but Julian Thorne, standing behind me, decided to clarify. "It means she had her tubes tied, Marcus." Julian said, his voice deep and rumbling. "It means she was sterilized 2 years ago." I looked at my father. "She cannot get pregnant, Dad. It is medically impossible." Marcus stared at the screen. He shook his head slowly, refusing to process the information. "No," he whispered. "No. We saw the ultrasound. She has a baby bump. Look at her stomach." I walked over to my sister. She backed away from me, clutching her belly, her eyes wide with terror. It is a silicone bump. Destiny, I said. You bought it online. Probably with the same credit card Hunter used to take his mistress to the Ritz. I reached out. Destiny tried to swat my hand away, screaming, but I was faster. I grabbed the fabric of her gold dress at the waist. I pulled. The dress was tight, but underneath the shape was rigid. It didn't move like skin. It shifted. Get away from me, Destiny shrieked, shoving me back. But she had shoved too hard. In the struggle, the strap of the prosthetic belly shifted. The entire mound slid sideways, looking grotesque and unnatural under the silk of her dress. The room gasped. It was undeniable. There was no baby. There was just a prop. Marcus stood up. He looked at his daughter's distorted stomach. He looked at the surgical record on the screen. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Why, Marcus whispered, his voice broken. Why would you lie about a child? Destiny started crying, but this time the tears were real. They were tears of a cornered rat. I had to, she sobbed. Hunter needed money. The bookies were going to break his legs. We needed cash. I turned to the final document on the screen. It was a property listing. The land in Savannah, I said. The 20 acres Grandma left you, Dad. The land you said you were keeping for your retirement. I looked at Marcus. Last week you put it on the market. You told me you were selling it because you wanted to set up a trust fund for the new grandchild. You said you wanted to help Destiny with the nursery expenses. Marcus nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. She told me babies are expensive, he mumbled. She said Hunter's bonus was delayed. She said if I sold the land, I could save them. I looked at Destiny. You made them sell their retirement. I said, my voice thick with disgust. You made them sell the only asset they had left that I hadn't paid for. And you were going to take that $200,000 and give it to a gambling addict and his mistress. Destiny fell to her knees. I didn't have a choice, she screamed. I love him. You love money. I yelled back, losing my composure for the first time. You love the lifestyle. You faked a human life. You played on the deepest hopes of your own parents just to cover up a lie. I looked at Serena. My mother was staring at the wall, catatonic. Her brain had simply shut down. But Marcus was feeling everything. He looked at Destiny. The daughter he had favored, the daughter he had praised while he called me a mistake, the daughter he had wanted to give my inheritance to. You are not pregnant, Marcus asked, his voice barely audible. No, Dad. Destiny whimpered. And the land money, Marcus asked. It is gone, Destiny admitted. Hunter took the deposit this morning. Marcus let out a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a scream. It was a groan, a deep guttural sound of a soul snapping in half. He clutched his chest. His face turned a violent shade of gray. He swayed. Dad, I shouted, stepping forward. But I was too late. Marcus's eyes rolled back in his head. He collapsed. He didn't crumple gracefully like they do in the movies. He hit the marble floor hard, dead weight, overturning the table as he went. The blue folder, the DNA test, and the shattered glass all came crashing down on top of him. Marcus, Serena screamed, snapping out of her trance. The room erupted into chaos. Destiny scrambled backward, crawling away from her father's body like a coward. Julian Thorne was already moving. He was on his knees beside Marcus, instantly checking for a pulse. Call 911, Julian shouted at his bodyguard. I stood there looking down at the man who had tried to ruin me an hour ago. He was gasping for air, clutching his heart, destroyed not by the daughter he stole, but by the daughter he chose. I looked at Destiny, who was huddled in the corner holding her fake stomach. You wanted a tragedy for your little reality show? I asked her. My voice cold. I pointed at our father dying on the floor. Congratulations, Destiny. You finally produced something real. The paramedics had moved Marcus to a chair, loosening his tie and checking his vitals. He was conscious, barely, his face a mask of gray ash and sweat. He was breathing, but the spirit inside him had broken. Serena was kneeling beside him, not out of love, but out of fear. She was clinging to the only raft she had left in the ocean of disaster she had created. Destiny was still sobbing in the corner, clutching her fake silicone stomach, looking like a child who had been caught stealing candy, except she had tried to steal a legacy. They looked pathetic. A few hours ago, they were the royalty of the congregation sitting on their thrones, passing judgment on me. Now they were ruins. But I wasn't done. I looked at Julian Thorne. He gave me a small, grim nod. The police were waiting outside for the official arrest, but before the handcuffs went on, I had one final administrative duty to perform. I had to settle the estate. I walked over to the table where my bags still lay scattered. I picked up my iPad Pro. I wiped a smudge of dust from the screen, unlocked it with Face ID, and connected it to the room's projection system. The screen flickered to life one last time. "You are probably wondering what happens next," I said, my voice cutting through the sound of Destiny's whimpering. "You are probably thinking that you can go home, regroup, hire a lawyer, and fight this." I looked at Serena. "You are probably thinking you can go back to the parsonage, lock the doors, and pray for a miracle." I swiped the screen. A satellite image of the large colonial-style house they lived in appeared. It was a beautiful home. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a manicured lawn, and a heated pool. It was the house where I had been made to sleep in the smallest room. It was the house where I had scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees while Destiny watched TV. "It is a nice house," I observed, looking at the image. "Market value is currently $1.5 million. Serena looked up, a flicker of defiance returning to her eyes. "It is our house," she rasped. "We have lived there for 20 years. You cannot touch it. It is homestead protected." I laughed. It was a soft, dangerous sound. "Homestead protection only applies if you own the home, Serena." I tapped the iPad. A deed appeared on the screen. "Do you remember 10 years ago?" I asked. "Do you remember when the IRS was threatening to seize the house because Marcus hadn't paid taxes in 5 years? Do you remember crying at the kitchen table, begging God for a savior?" Marcus looked up, his eyes glassy. "I saved you," I reminded him. "I stepped in. I told you I had a friend, a private investor who would buy the house, pay off the tax lien, and let you live there, rent-free as long as you paid the utilities." I zoomed in on the owner's name listed on the deed. Vance Holdings, LLC. "You told everyone that Vance Holdings was a shell company owned by the church," I said. "But it isn't." I tapped a button, opening the corporate registration documents for Vance Holdings, LLC, sole member, manager, Gabrielle Vance. The silence that followed was deafening. "I own the house," I said, spelling it out clearly. "I bought it, I paid the taxes, I paid the insurance. You are not owners, you are tenants, and you are tenants without a lease." I opened my email app on the iPad. I had a document already drafted. It was titled Notice to Vacate. In the state of Georgia, a tenant at will can be evicted immediately if there is proof of criminal activity or substantial damage to the property, I explained, sounding like the corporate executive I was. "And considering you used my property to run a fraudulent charity and launder money for your son-in-law's gambling addiction, I would say that qualifies as criminal activity." I picked up the Apple Pencil. I signed my name at the bottom of the screen with a flourish. "Sent," I said as I hit the button. A moment later, the phones in the pockets of Marcus and Serena chimed simultaneously. It wasn't a text message. It was an automated alert from the smart home security system. "I just updated the security protocols for the house," I said casually. Serena scrambled for her phone. She stared at the screen in horror. "What did you do?" she screamed. "I changed the codes," I said. "And I engaged the deadlock protocol." I pointed to the live feed from the security cameras at their house, which was now streaming on the big screen behind me. The garage doors were closing. The heavy oak front door clicked audibly as the electronic deadbolt slid into place. The shutters on the windows rolled down. "Your clothes are in there," I listed. "Your jewelry. Your cash stash in the safe behind the painting. Destiny's collection of designer shoes. It is all locked inside. You can't do this, Destiny wailed. My medication is in there. Your prenatal vitamins for the fake baby, I asked. You can buy more at the drugstore. Oh, wait. You can't. I swiped to the next tab on my iPad. This was the banking portal. Because I also filed that lien I told you about, I said. Ping, ping, ping. More notifications hit their phones. This time it was the banking app. I watched as Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket with shaking hands. He stared at the notification. Alert. Account frozen. Suspicious activity reported. Serena checked hers. Alert. Credit line suspended. I hold the primary mortgage on the church building too, I revealed. And since I am the largest creditor and I have evidence that the funds were being misused, the bank granted me an emergency freeze on all associated assets. I looked at them. Your checking accounts, your savings, the church discretionary fund, Destiny's allowance account. It is all frozen. You cannot buy a pack of gum right now. Serena stood up, stumbling toward me. You are leaving us with nothing, she cried. We are your parents. We are old. Where will we sleep tonight? I looked at her without an ounce of sympathy. I hear the bus station is open. 24 hours, I said. Since that is where you claimed you found me, maybe you should go there. It seems poetic. Suddenly, Hunter's phone, which he had dropped in his haste to escape, lit up on the floor. I walked over and picked it up. It was a text message from the car's security system. I looked at the screen and smiled. It seems Hunter didn't get very far, I announced. I tapped into the Tesla app on my iPad. The car Hunter had driven away in the black Model S that he told everyone he bought with his bonus was actually a company car leased under my LLC for visiting executives. I let him drive it because it kept him quiet. I just activated the remote kill switch, I said. I projected the GPS map onto the screen. The dot representing the car had stopped in the middle of the intersection of 10th and Piedmont. The car is dead, I said. The doors are locked, and I just tipped off the police to his location. He is trapped inside a glass box waiting to be arrested. I turned off the iPad. The screen went black, leaving the room in dim, ambient light. The party was over. The food was uneaten. The decorations were mocking us. And the family of the year was destroyed. I walked back to my father. He looked small. He looked frail. He looked like a man who had sold his soul and got paid in counterfeit bills. You have a debt of $1.2 million. I summarized, ticking off the points on my fingers. You have zero equity in the house. You have zero cash in the bank. You have zero cars. And you have zero daughters. I leaned in close so only he could hear the final verdict. You charged me for a childhood I never asked for. So I am charging you for a retirement you will never have. I stood up and straightened my jacket. I grabbed my purse, the one Hunter had emptied, which I had repacked during the chaos. I felt the weight of my car keys in my hand. My car. The one I owned. I looked at the crowd of stunned onlookers one last time. The show is over, I said. I walked toward the door where Julian Thorne was waiting for me. He held the door open. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. I was leaving behind the fear. I was leaving behind the shame. And I was leaving them exactly where they belonged. On the street. Good luck, I whispered to the empty air as I walked out into the cool night air of Atlanta. You are going to need it. The heavy oak doors of the Onyx room did not slam shut behind me because I did not leave immediately. I stood by the exit next to Senator Julian Thorne and I watched. There is a specific kind of silence that precedes a riot. It is the silence of 100 minds simultaneously realizing they have been played for fools. It is the silence of betrayal turning into kinetic energy. For the last hour, the congregation of the Greater Grace Tabernacle had sat in judgment of me. They had snickered when my mother mocked my clothes. They had nodded in agreement when my father called me a bad investment. They had been complicit in my humiliation because they believed in the divine authority of Reverend Marcus Vance. But now the projector screen was dark. The spreadsheets were gone. The truth, however, hung in the air like smoke. The grand narrative of the Holy Family had been stripped away, revealing a rot so deep it made the air hard to breathe. The first sound to break the silence was a chair scraping against the floor. It was Mrs. Gable, the elderly piano teacher who had taught me scales when I was 7. She stood up. Her hands were shaking not with age but with a fury that made her look 10 feet tall. She walked toward the head table. She didn't look at me. She looked at Marcus, who was still gasping for air on the floor, and Serena, who was clutching his hand in a parody of devotion. "You told me the roof fund was empty," Mrs. Gable said. Her voice was quiet, trembling with a lifetime of trust that had just been shattered. "Last winter, when the pipes burst in the church basement, you stood in the pulpit and told us there was no money. You told us we had to sacrifice." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "Sister Gable, please," he wheezed. "It is complicated." "It is not complicated," Mrs. Gable screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. "I gave you my heating money. I sat in my house in a coat for 3 months because you said God needed a new roof." She pointed a gnarled finger at Destiny, who was shivering in her gold dress. "But you didn't buy a roof. You bought her a BMW." That was the spark. The powder keg exploded. Deacon Jones stood up next. He was a large man, a man who had protected Marcus for 20 years, a man who had thrown people out of the church for questioning the budget. He walked over to the table. He picked up a crystal wine glass, one of the expensive ones that Marcus had insisted were necessary for the dignity of the event. "I cashed out my 401k for the building expansion," Deacon Jones roared. $200,000. You said we were breaking ground in June." He looked at the empty spreadsheet on the screen. "There is no expansion, is there?" Marcus tried to scramble backward, pushing himself along the floor, but his legs wouldn't work. "No, Deacon, listen. The permits are pending," liar Deacon Jones shouted. He threw the wine glass. It didn't hit Marcus, but it shattered against the wall right above his head. Red wine splattered across the white wallpaper like a gunshot wound. The sound of breaking glass was the permission the rest of the room needed. Suddenly everyone was standing. The 100 guests, the faithful flock, transformed into a mob. They weren't angry on my behalf. I knew that. They didn't care that I had been kidnapped. They cared that they had been robbed. They cared that their tithes, their offerings, their widows' mites had been funneled into handbags, luxury cars, and hotel rooms for mistresses. "You stole my son's college fund," a woman in a blue hat yelled, rushing the stage. "You drove a Tesla while my kids ate ramen noodles," another man screamed. The scene descended into chaos. The carefully curated elegance of the Onyx Room evaporated. People began to throw things. Bread rolls rained down on the head table. Plates of half-eaten chicken were hurled like discuses. A tureen of soup was overturned, sending hot liquid cascading off the edge of the table and onto Serena's designer shoes. Serena shrieked, scrambling up onto her chair to escape the mess. "Stop it!" she screamed at them. "We are your spiritual leaders. You cannot touch us. God will strike you down." "God is not in this room, Serena," Mrs. Gable yelled back. "Only thieves are in this room." I watched as the people who had looked down on me for 30 years turned into savages. It was terrifying, and yet it was deeply satisfying. It was the inevitable collapse of a cult of personality. Marcus and Serena had built their power on the belief that they were chosen, that they were special. Now they were just grifters, covered in food scraps, cowering before the people they had swindled. Destiny tried to run. She stood up and made a break for the side door, but a group of choir members blocked her path. "Where do you think you are going, princess?" one of the sopranos asked, crossing her arms. "I didn't do anything," Destiny sobbed, clutching her fake belly again out of habit, then realizing the prop was useless. "It was them. It was Mom and Dad. I just wanted to be happy, you wanted to be rich," the soprano spat. You think we didn't see you rolling your eyes at us every Sunday? You think we didn't see the way you laughed when we put our crumpled dollars in the collection plate? Someone grabbed the back of Destiny's dress. She spun around terrified. Give me back my donation, a man yelled. The $1,000 for the mission trip that never happened. Give it back. I don't have it, Destiny screamed. Hunter spent it. The mob was closing in. The physical distance between the angry crowd and the Vance family was disappearing. I saw Marcus trying to crawl under the table for protection. I saw Serena using a silver serving tray as a shield. They looked ridiculous. They looked small. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Julian. We should go, he said quietly. This is going to get ugly. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. I want to see this. I wanted to see the consequence. I had spent my whole life protecting them from consequences. I had been the buffer between them and reality. I had paid the bills so they wouldn't feel the cold. I had fixed the mistakes so they wouldn't feel the shame. Now the buffer was gone. Reality was crashing down on them with the force of a tidal wave. A bread roll hit Serena square in the forehead. She gasped, looking shocked that the world dared to touch her. Police, someone yelled. Call the police. We don't need police, Deacon Jones shouted. We need our money. He grabbed the tablecloth of the head table and yanked it. The centerpiece, the silverware, the expensive wine bottles, and the projector all came crashing down with a deafening noise. Marcus, who was hiding underneath, yelped as plates rained down around him. He was curled into a fetal position, sobbing. Please, he moaned. I am a man of God. I am a man of God. You are a man of greed, the crowd chanted back. It was a frenzy. The anger was feeding on itself, growing hotter and more dangerous. I saw a man pick up a heavy chair. He looked like he was ready to swing it. That was when the sound cut through the noise. It started faint, a distant wail, but it grew louder within seconds. Whoop! Whoop! Sirens. Not just one. Many. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high windows of the restaurant, painting the chaotic scene in a strobe of emergency colors. The crowd froze. The man with the chair lowered it. The heavy double doors at the main entrance burst open. They didn't just open, they were rammed. Federal agents, a voice boomed. Nobody move! A dozen figures in tactical gear swarmed into the room. They weren't the local beat cops. These were the FBI. Their jackets bore the bold yellow letters that signaled the end of the line for the Vance family. Hands where we can see them. The lead agent shouted, his weapon drawn but pointed low. The crowd instinctively backed away, hands flying into the air. The mob mentality evaporated in the face of federal authority. Behind the tactical team, regular uniformed police officers filed in. And behind them, walking calmly, was a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. I recognized him. He was the district attorney. Julian had not just called the police. He had called in every favor, every connection, and every ounce of influence he had as a state senator. He had ensured that this wasn't just a domestic disturbance call. This was a federal raid. The agents didn't look at the crowd. They moved with precision toward the head table. Marcus Vance, the lead agent, shouted. Marcus peeked out from under the table, his face smeared with sauce and wine. Step out! Marcus crawled out, trembling so hard he couldn't stand. Two agents grabbed him by the arms and hauled him to his feet. Serena Vance. Serena stood up, trying to wipe the food from her dress, trying to regain some shred of dignity. I am the first lady of this church, she stammered. This is a mistake. You are under arrest, the agent said, spinning her around. For what? Serena shrieked as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked onto her wrists. For kidnapping, wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The agent listed the charges calmly. Destiny tried to blend into the crowd, but an officer spotted her. Destiny Vance Fitzgerald. No, she whispered. You are being detained for questioning regarding conspiracy and fraud. They handcuffed her too. I watched as the three of them were lined up, the father, the mother, and the golden child. They looked at me. For a second across the room our eyes met. Marcus looked at me with regret. Serena looked at me with hate. Destiny looked at me with envy. I looked at them with nothing. The agents began to march them toward the door. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, watching in silence as their fallen idols were dragged away. As they passed me, Marcus stopped. He dug his heels in for a second. "Gabby," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Who will bail us out?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stolen me, used me, and discarded me. "Call the anonymous donor," I said. "Oh, wait. She is busy." The agents pushed him forward. The doors swung open, and the flashing lights swallowed them whole. The chaos of the angry mob was instantly silenced by the heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots hitting the marble floor. The FBI agents did not scream. They did not need to. They moved with a terrifying surgical precision that commanded absolute submission. The local police held the perimeter, keeping the stunned crowd back, while the federal agents advanced on the head table like a black tide. Senator Julian Thorne stepped forward. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents that were thick enough to be a novel. He didn't hand them to Marcus. He handed them to the special agent in charge. "Execute the warrants," Julian said, his voice cutting through the hum of the air conditioning. "Every single one of them." The lead agent nodded. He turned to Marcus, who was trembling so violently that the silverware on the table rattled. The agent didn't offer a polite greeting. He didn't ask for cooperation. He reached for his belt and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Marcus Vance, the agent, announced, his voice booming. "You are under arrest pursuant to a federal indictment." "For what?" Marcus squeaked, his voice cracking. "I am a pastor. You cannot arrest a man of God in his own church." The agent grabbed Marcus's wrist and twisted it behind his back. The click of the handcuffs locking into place was sharp and final. "You are charged with 1 count of federal kidnapping resulting in crossing state lines." The agent read, his tone flat and clinical. 30 counts of Social Security fraud, 12 counts of money laundering through a tax-exempt religious organization, and 1 count of aggravated child abuse. The words hung in the air. Kidnapping, abuse. The congregation gasped. The image of the holy reverend was shattered, replaced by a common criminal in a stained suit. Serena screamed. It wasn't a scream of sorrow for her husband. It was a scream of self-preservation. As an agent approached her, she scrambled backward, knocking over a chair. "It was him!" Serena shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. "It was his idea. He told me to take the baby. He said we needed the money. I just wanted to be a mother. I am a victim too." The agent didn't pause. He grabbed her arms. "Serena Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, wire fraud, and tax evasion." "No!" Serena wailed as the cuffs bit into her wrists. "I am the First Lady. You can't touch me." Next came Hunter. 2 officers dragged him back in through the side door. He had tried to hide in the kitchen, but there was no escape. He was crying, tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive silk tie. "I am a businessman," Hunter yelled. "I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer said, slamming him against the wall to frisk him. "You are charged with securities fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny." Finally, the room went quiet. The 3 architects of my misery were lined up, bound in steel. The agents began to march them toward the exit, but there was one person left standing. Destiny. My sister stood alone in the center of the room, clutching her fake silicone belly. She looked at the agents, waiting for them to come for her. She held out her wrists, expecting the same fate. She wanted to be a victim. She wanted the drama. But the agents walked right past her. "Wait!" Destiny cried out, her voice trembling. "What about me? Where are you taking them?" The lead agent stopped. He looked at Destiny with a mixture of pity and indifference. "We don't have a warrant for you, Mrs. Fitzgerald," he said. "Being spoiled isn't a federal crime." And lying about a pregnancy isn't illegal, it is just pathetic. He signaled to his team. You are free to go, the agent said, but you can't go home. The house is a crime scene. It is being seized as evidence. He turned and walked away, dragging my screaming parents out into the night. Destiny stood there frozen. She looked around the empty room. Her husband was gone. Her parents were gone. Her house was gone. Her money was gone. She wasn't arrested, but she had received a sentence far worse for someone like her. She was irrelevant. She was homeless. And for the first time in her life, she was completely and utterly alone. The flashing lights of the police cruisers bathed the room in a chaotic rhythm of red and blue, cutting through the elegant gloom of the onyx room. It was the only spotlight my parents had left. I watched the federal agents march Marcus and Serena toward the exit. They were not walking with the heads high posture of the spiritual leaders they pretended to be. They were stumbling. The weight of the steel cuffs seemed to drag their shoulders down, but the weight of the truth was even heavier. As they reached the heavy double doors, Marcus dug his heels into the carpet. He fought against the grip of the federal agent panic overriding his dignity. He turned his head, his eyes searching the room frantically until they landed on me. He looked pathetic. The sweat on his forehead mixed with the red wine stains on his collar, making him look like a clown whose makeup was running. "Gabby!" he screamed. His voice was raw, cracking with desperation. "Gabby, honey, please. You can stop this. You know people. You have money now. Do not let them take your father." Serena was sobbing quietly next to him, a broken wheezing sound that offered no comfort, but Marcus kept pleading. "I am sorry," he wailed. "I will make it right. We can work this out. Just make a call. Save me, Gabby." I walked toward them. The agent paused, giving me a moment. I stood inches from Marcus. I looked at the man who had stolen me from a nursery and billed me for my own survival. I looked at the man who had preached about charity while stealing from the poor. I waited for a flicker of love to spark in my chest. I waited to feel that familiar pull of guilt, the instinct to fix his mess. But there was nothing. Just a hollow space where a father should have been. I looked him dead in the eye. The silence between us stretched for an eternity. "Do not call me that," I said. My voice was low, steady, and colder than the grave he had tried to bury me in. Marcus blinked, confused. "What, Gabby was the girl you abused," I told him. "Gabby was the girl you charged for milk and diapers. Gabby was the girl you made sleep in the smallest room and scrub your floors. Gabby is gone." I took a step back, moving into the space beside Julian Thorne. I felt the warmth of my biological father standing guard beside me. "My name is Camille Thorne," I said, enunciating every syllable. "And I do not know you. I do not associate with criminals." Marcus opened his mouth to beg again to try one last manipulation, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned my back on him. It was a simple movement, a rotation of my heels on the marble floor, but it felt like I was moving mountains. I walked away. "Take them away," I heard Julian say to the agents. I didn't look back. I heard the agents push them through the doors. I heard Marcus shouting my name one last time, his voice fading into the night air. And then I heard the sound that I will remember for the rest of my life. Thud. Click. The heavy door of the police cruiser slammed shut. That sound was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the period at the end of a 30-year sentence. The air in the room suddenly felt lighter. The suffocation I had lived with since I was a child evaporated. The nightmare was over. They were gone. And for the first time in my life, standing in the wreckage of my 30th birthday, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Free. The sun over Atlanta feels different when you are standing in your own light. It has been exactly 365 days since the doors of the police cruiser slammed shut on my past. Today the air is crisp and the sky is a brilliant, unblemished blue. I am standing on a podium in front of a newly renovated building in downtown. A large silk ribbon stretches across the entrance. The sign above the door reads, The Camille Thorne Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I look out at the crowd. There are no judgmental church members here. There are no fake friends. There are city officials, supportive colleagues from the logistics industry, and families who are looking for hope. And standing right next to me, holding the giant ceremonial scissors, is Julian Thorne, my father. He looks at me, and for the first time in my life, I do not see calculation in a parent's eyes. I see pride. Pure, unadulterated pride. He is not proud of me because I paid a bill. He is proud of me because I survived. I take the microphone. My hand does not shake. 1 year ago, I was handed an invoice for my existence, I tell the crowd. I was told that I was a bad investment. I was told that because I did not share blood with the people who raised me, I was nothing more than a debt to be collected. I pause, letting the wind carry my words. But today, I stand here as proof that family is not defined by DNA, and it is certainly not defined by a transaction. Family is the safety net that catches you when you fall, not the trap that pushes you down. The crowd applauds. I smile. It is a real smile, one that reaches my eyes. After the ceremony, as the guests mingle and drink sparkling cider, Julian pulls me aside. I got a letter today, he says quietly. From the federal penitentiary. I nod. I know who it is from. Marcus wants to know if you will visit, Julian says. He says he has found God again. He says prison has humbled him. I look at the beautiful center we just opened. I look at my life, which is now filled with peace travel and people who actually respect me. Tell him I am busy, I say. And I am. The update on the Vance family is a matter of public record now. Reverend Marcus and First Lady Serena were sentenced to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called their crime one of the most heinous acts of deception he had ever seen. They are currently serving their time in separate facilities. Serena works in the prison laundry, folding sheets for 12 cents an hour. I find that deeply poetic. The woman who tossed me in a laundry bag is now spending the rest of her life staring at dirty linens. Hunter took a plea deal. He got 5 years for securities fraud. He is currently sharing a cell with a man named Tiny, who does not appreciate his stories about Wall Street. His mistress, Tiffany, left him the day the money ran out. And then there is Destiny. I checked on her last week. Not because I care, but because I believe in the importance of auditing my results. Destiny was not charged with a crime, but she was sentenced by life. With no husband, no parents, no money, and no skills, she had to enter the workforce for the first time at age 28. She works at a diner on the outskirts of the city. It is a greasy spoon place, the kind where the floors are sticky and the tips are low. I drove by in my car. I watched through the window. Destiny was wearing a stained apron. She was carrying a heavy tray of dirty dishes. A customer, a man who looked a lot like Hunter used to look, yelled at her for forgetting his ketchup. I watched her apologize. I watched her wipe the table. I watched her look down at her shoes, which were no longer designer heels, but sensible non-slip sneakers. She looked up and saw my car. She saw me behind the wheel of my new Porsche. For a second, our eyes met through the glass. She didn't wave. She didn't glare. She just looked tired. She looked like someone who had finally learned the value of $1 the hard way. I drove away. I didn't feel glee. I didn't feel hate. I felt nothing. And that indifference is the true victory. I turn back to the camera now, to you, the person watching this story. I know why you are here. I know you are watching this because maybe, just maybe, you have someone in your life who makes you feel like you owe them for your existence. Maybe you have a mother who criticizes your weight but takes your money. Maybe you have a father who only calls when he needs something. Maybe you have a sibling who treats you like a stepping stone. I want you to listen to me closely. You do not owe your abusers a seat at your table just because they gave you life or because they fed you. A toxic relationship is like a tumor. It feeds on you. It drains you. And if you let it stay because you are afraid of the surgery, it will kill you. Cutting them off is not cruel. It is life-saving. I am Camille Thorne. I was stolen. I was used. I was billed, but I paid my debts and I closed the account. And now I am the CEO of my own life. If you are waiting for permission to walk away, this is it. Pack your bags, change your locks, and do not look back. Because the only thing behind you is the invoice. But ahead of you is freedom. This story serves as a powerful reminder that sharing DNA does not grant a license for abuse. Gabrielle's journey illustrates that true power lies in self-respect and financial independence. For years, she allowed her generosity to be weaponized against her, but she ultimately learned that we teach people how to treat us. The narrative demonstrates that setting boundaries is essential for survival. When kindness is met with constant cruelty and exploitation, the healthiest choice is often to sever ties completely. Being alone is far better than being surrounded by people who only value you for what you provide. Hit the like button if you agree that peace is more important than toxic loyalty, and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power. Share this video with someone who needs to know that it is never too late to rewrite their ending. Thank you for watching.